Should I delay weaning with known allergens like eggs, nuts, or dairy and wait until they're a bit older?
No.
Should I always do baby-led weaning over spoon feeding where possible?
No.
Okay. Is porridge the best thing to start my child on?
No.
Okay, interesting. What is the one thing that parents can do to feel confident and not overwhelmed about feeding their children?
Know that it's up and down, and that's perfectly normal.
Okay, brilliant. And is it true that what my child eats below the age of 2 impacts their preferences for food in later life?
Yep.
Gosh, there is so much to talk about here. I'm so glad you're here, Charlotte. This is great. I thought what we could do to kick off this discussion actually is talk about what weaning actually means, because it's a term that gets bandied around. Yep. I'm certainly hearing about it a lot. I'm looking into it a lot now that I'm a new parent. What do we mean by weaning?
So weaning, it is actually a bit confusing, and a lot of parents think that weaning means weaning a baby off of milk, but that is not what it is meant in the sense of what we're talking about. We are talking about weaning is in the introducing babies to solid food, weaning them off of an only milk diet onto a diet that is full of a variety of foods and eventually something similar to what you and I eat as adults.
Okay, fine. So that's the definition of weaning, because I think the word wean itself it's kind of a bit of a misnomer. It's kind of like, you're weaning them off this and onto this, and then that's the trajectory. But it's
and a few years ago the government actually really wanted to change that. They wanted to start calling it complementary feeding. But that didn't really fly. People still were like, no, I'm not sure what this is. So, you do hear a lot, introducing solids, complementary feeding, weaning. But to be honest, the term that most people understand is weaning. So that's what we tend to stick with and use.
Okay, fine. So I'll stick with that. So in terms of this concept of baby-led weaning, when did this actually become a thing? Has it always been there, or is it relatively new?
In some countries, absolutely. It's been really normal. It's well, you say relatively new. It's probably, 10, 15 years now of people in kind of Western countries and Western communities doing this a little bit more. I may be wrong in that. It may have been even longer. It may be much more traditional. But, really in the UK, we've talked a lot about kind of introducing solid food and a lot about it being this mashed food and food off of a spoon. So in terms of, what advice we give out, I'd say it's quite recent that we now talk about this idea of baby-led weaning. So just to explain what that means is baby-led weaning is the idea of offering your baby pieces of food rather than food off of a spoon. And the idea is that they help themselves, they eat the food themselves, they practice self-feeding, and they feed themselves more solid pieces of food. They still need to be soft, they still need to be easy textures for babies to manage, but it means that they don't need to be offered off of a spoon and blended or mashed or pureed up. There's a lot of people who are real advocates for baby-led weaning, and they're like, no, this is the way to go. And there's a lot of people who find that quite intimidating, and they would rather go in a bit more gently with the purees and the mashes. And I'm a fan of a best of both approach. There's no reason, contrary to what lots of people will tell you, why you can't do a best of both. It's great to get those finger foods in. It's great to practice skills of self-feeding and eating, but actually there's no reason why we can't have some food, more variety, more textures offered off of a spoon at the same time.
Okay, fine. And the people who sort of espouse the benefits of baby-led weaning, of which there are some, what are those benefits that they're sort of over-indexing on?
Okay, so with baby-led weaning, there is some research that actually it can help babies to be a bit better at self-regulation. So knowing how much to eat, because they're self-feeding. They're not have someone there with a spoon by their mouth, kind of almost like encouraging them to eat. They're in charge of their own meal. They're in charge of how much they eat. Also, it's really great for developing, like I say, those skills around picking food up, bringing it to their mouth. So it's hand-eye coordination. And also because they're eating more solid pieces of food, in terms of eating, it's actually a skill that babies need to learn. So the oral motor skills can be, worked a little bit more, and they can learn a bit more of how to cope with textures and therefore move through that texture development easier. So that's all great. But actually, you can do that if you do purees in the right way as well. It doesn't have to be one way or the other. For example, if a parent's sitting there with a spoon, spoon, trying to kind of feed a baby who doesn't want that food, that's not a good idea. But there's loads of ways you can do that. So, you could offer a baby a loaded spoon and still allow them to self-feed. You can make sure that the textures that you offer on a spoon go up in texture and offer a variety of lumps and different foods. So it's not black and white, it doesn't have to be one way or the other, but there are benefits to baby-led weaning. And I would always recommend that people do introduce finger foods and pieces of food for babies to eat at the same time, because that is important for oral motor skills and the development of eating skills.
On the subject of sort of appetite regulation and understanding their own sort of cues, is it similar in that breastfeeding or exclusive breastfeeding seems to have some benefits later on down the line versus formula feeding, where you're sort of constantly, well, not constantly, but you're encouraging baby to consume food on your schedule? Well,
I would say actually it is really similar in the sense that, yes, with breastfeeding, we recommend breastfeeding on demand. So on demand or responsively, we say, so as and when baby suggests that they need it. However, formula feeding can be done like that too. We just don't really realize it quite often. And actually, if you sometimes, and I know this a lot from working with parents, they'll see the information on the back of a formula pack and think, oh, my baby needs to be having that amount.
Gosh, that's literally me.
This is exactly it. But this happens all the time. And so parents are like, well, they have to have that amount. So that means that even if they suggest to me they don't want it, I need to try and get this into baby. And it's completely understandable, because as parents, we're like, well, this is what we're told to do. I have no idea. This is, my first child. I've not had experiences before. I'm going to go with that. But actually, you can still responsibly formula feed a baby by listening to their cues. If they're turning their head away, if they're crying, if they're suggesting they don't want anymore, listening to those cues, because those are all appetite cues. And really early on, babies do try and show us those, and it can be really easy to override it. Lots of parents do it. It's really, really common, but we don't have to just kind of responsibly breastfeed responsibly. We can also be responsive when we're formula feeding too.
Gotcha, yeah. I mean, it's a whole new language that I'm trying to learn right now. Like cues, different types of cry, signs, like, when he's scratching his head, or like he's pulling out his hair at the moment, he's 4 months. And when he gets like, irritated, he's like, sort of like hands on the head sort of thing. So all these things, like, no one tells you this stuff. Even in medical school, we don't get taught this kind of stuff either. So it's really like experience firsthand. This is what I'm sort of picking up
completely on. And one thing I would always say as well is that your baby is communicating with you. So everything they do, it's a communication, and it's really hard to interpret that. And that takes time and practice and experience. But I would say it's the same with feeding. It's the same with when we're feeding them at the table. They are communicating messages to you, and they also learn our response. So our response each time needs to kind of be predictable, so that they can understand, well, when I cry, this is what my parents do.
Gotcha.
For example, if they cry and we're still shoving food in their mouth and being like, no, please eat it, their reaction is, well, my cry is pointless, so I may as well just not do that, and I've just got to eat the food because my caregiver is telling me, no, you've got to eat this food. So it almost overrides some of their kind of innate responses, which I know it sounds really extreme, and it is so hard. I've messed up plenty of times being a parent, have no idea, but it is that communication and just thinking like, my baby can't tell me I don't want this right now, but they can communicate it. And sometimes we're like, what's wrong with you? But actually, we just need to take a step back and go, what could they be communicating right now? And believe me, I'm not the parenting guru, I promise you, but I think that's one thing I've really feel strongly I've learned from being a parent, and especially having two very different kids, is they are always communicating with us, and how we respond to that communication can help them to learn how to carry on that communication. Does that make sense?
That's going to be really reassuring for a lot of parents out there, because, with all the training that you've had, the research that you've looked into, and then you're here saying, I still mess up, and I've messed up big time in the past because I haven't been responsive to cues, and actually learning it's not even just the general language of babies, it's actually their individual language. Like, I'm sure the cues are very different from baby to baby, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'd say that is a huge thing, you know, especially with weaning. You know, so often parents come to me, you know, my baby's not taking to weaning, or my baby's absolutely guzzling food. And actually I had 2 kids, completely different experience with weaning. And obviously this is the field I specialize in. And I think it was the biggest eye opener for me. I was like, wow, it doesn't always go like that.
Yeah.
And my second was quite a challenge in so many ways. So I was like, well, it's not just me that's created a really, really great eater. You know, it was so much hard work with my second. So I think that we don't, and the same with sleep, behavior, we don't take their personalities into account. We almost think they need to be like uniform. This is how they should behave. This is how they should sleep. But actually, like, we as adults don't have the same patterns. We don't eat the same foods. We don't have the same hunger and fullness. We don't sleep the same amount of time. And why would babies? So I sometimes think we just need to step back and go, they are them. They are communicating. Let's listen. And I kind of regret with my daughter, she was really tricky when she was born. I had a really tough time with her, and I was constantly trying to fix, you know, what is wrong, what can I do? And I wish now that I'd just gone back and lent into it a bit and been like, do you know what, this is just her. She's not that comfortable right now, but actually, rather than me trying to fix it and taking her to appointment and, you know, just lean into it a bit and just go, this is how it's going to be for a while. I'm going to hold her. I'm going to make sure she's okay. And like I said, listen to that communication.
Yeah.
But easier said than done.
Totally. You mentioned textures a little bit earlier for both baby-led and spoon-fed. What is the sort of direction of travel in terms of when starting and when you know offering baby their first spoon of or pincer grip of food? What's the sort of like starting point and the eventual end point?
So when it comes to purees, you can absolutely start with a very thin puree if you want to. You do not need to. You can start with thicker mashes if you want to, but they just need to be quite uniform, so not lots of unexpected lumps in there. And that's very early on. Once your baby gets used to those, it's about gradually building those textures by adding less liquid, by blending a bit less or mashing a little bit less, maybe cooking a little bit less so it's not quite as soft. And it's really good to do that by stealth. So as soon as your baby seems to be like accepting a texture, move it up a notch, because the quicker you can move through those textures, it's great. It's really, really good, because we know that by around about 9-10 months of age, if babies haven't been introduced to lumps, it can actually lead to them being a little bit more delayed in terms of their acceptance of lumps and bumps in food.
Gotcha.
But when it comes to finger food, so you mentioned pincer grip, but actually babies don't have that till they're around about 9 months of age. That's when they start to develop that pincer grip. Before then, they have what's called a palmar grasp. So they can grab things in their palm like this, which is why finger foods are recommended to be kind of like the size and shape of an adult finger, so that a baby can grab it like this and self-feed. But it also really importantly needs to, and I love this saying, it needs to squidge between your finger and thumb. That's the official terminology. But you basically need to cook it so that when you give it to baby and it's this nice shape, they can squidge it like this between their finger and thumb. And if you as an adult can do that, it means your baby's mouth, gums, they won't have teeth yet, but that's fine, will be able to flatten the food. And then they'll be able to work it to the back of their mouth and swallow it without any problems. So that's the initial, what you're working for. And you want to move through those textures fairly quickly, because babies are developing skills around eating. And if we keep them on really thin textures or the same finger food, they're not going to be learning and developing and moving forward. So as quickly as you kind of can, or going with baby and their pace, and as soon as they accept it, move through. I always say via stealth. So gradually, as they get used to it, we're moving through those textures. But it's really important to do that. And it actually is something that a lot of parents are nervous to do, and so they don't. So you do often see babies. I often speak to parents whose babies are still having really thin purees at like 12 months, because parents have been really nervous to move through. So, you know, build up your confidence before. First aid courses if you need to. Like I say, let baby lead you, stealth, and really importantly, eat with baby, because they will learn through observation.
From observation,
massively.
So just as you were describing that palmar grip, that just reminds me of how often he's pulling my wife's hair at the moment. So he's definitely got that.
Exactly,
in terms of the worries that parents have, I'm imagining it's choking and the gag reflex. Is that the main issue that people have when deciding not to progress through those textures at the pace that you're recommending?
definitely. Huge nerves around gagging and choking. But gagging is really normal. Sure. Gagging is actually a safety mechanism, and babies have a gag reflex that's much further forward than ours as adults. As they get more experienced with kind of textures and eating, and they develop those oral motor skills, it actually integrates more back here where ours is. So their gag reflex is really far forward, which means that they might gag a lot. Some babies gag loads, and some babies might even vomit. So they'll be gagging so much that they throw up a lot of food, and that's really scary for parents. But it is actually quite normal. And choking is much less normal. It's obviously a lot more rare, but it is where a baby will normally not really be able to make any noise as much. So it's more likely that an airway is going to be blocked. So they're actually they're not really lurching forward and going and trying to get that food out. They're actually kind of a bit still and a bit quite quiet. And you'll notice they do start to go a little bit red in the face because they're trying to get this food out and they can't. It's a very different experience, both really scary. But I always recommend parents, if you are at all nervous, do a baby first aid course before you start weaning. It can give you all the confidence, and it can save lives, because if, which like I say is not normal, but if a baby does start to choke, right, I know what to do, and it genuinely can save lives. But it is rare. And if you are teaching your baby how to eat by moving through these textures, by sitting with them, by exploring spoons and finger foods, they are less likely to choke, because they will be developing the skills and the oral motor skills and the self-feeding skills to learn how to cope with food. So avoiding textures is not the answer.
Just a quick one. If you want to learn the 5 ingredients that I think are fantastic for inflammation that you should be getting into your diet every week, then download this PDF right now. It's in the link down there, and I'll send you my 5 ingredients for inflammation. Okay, that's really useful, because I think determining the difference between a gag and a choke is really, really important. And that actually just brings, I don't think I generally understood that the gag reflex is a lot more pronounced and more forward in the mouth. And that sort of gives me an understanding as to why when kids have illnesses and they're constantly coughing, that can actually lead to a vomit. And a cough, vomit is actually something that we see quite often with kids with bronchiolitis or common colds, that kind of thing. So that explains a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also probably because they haven't got quite so stretched out in terms of in the torso. So they've probably got, everything's a bit shorter. So it's easier to get out as well, isn't it? But yeah, definitely. If, and it's a protective reflex. It's there for a reason, to move anything that your body feels shouldn't be there. But like I say, as they get that experience with textures and eating, it will integrate, and they will then have developed skills to be able to manage a lot more. But still do need to be careful with some foods, but the number of foods you need to be careful with are a lot smaller than the number of foods that you can give to your baby. It's just about prepping them in the right way, and like I say, following your baby's lead and watching how they get on with food and trying to move with that. That's what I would say to do.
We jumped from to textures before going into timing, actually. So timing's a big thing. A lot of people are saying, you can wean them at 4 months, which sounds quite early, and it's kind of against the guidance right now. What are the sort of signs that we should be looking for that will tell us, baby could potentially be ready for weaning? Okay,
so first of all, we normally say that baby's ready at around 6 months of age. Now, I think that around is so important, because as you know, babies meet milestones at different stages. Not every single baby is going to turn 6 months and boom, they're ready for solids. But basically, we want to look for 3 main signs, as well as them being around 6 months. So those 3 signs are: they can sit up, hold their head and neck steady. This means that actually when they go to eat food, they can swallow it safely. So that, if they're still slopping, leaning to the side, it means that they're not able to hold that up. And actually, if you tried to eat sitting like that, it's going to be hard for you. So for a baby who doesn't have the kind of muscles and the stature to do that, so they need to be able to hold their head and neck steady. They should be able to have hand-eye coordination, so they can see food and they can bring it to the mouth themselves. That means they can self-feed, which is what we want to see them be able to do. And then number 3, they should be able to, the NHS say they should be able to swallow food, but you don't really know that until you've given them the food. So there's something called a tongue thrust reflex, which can be really helpful. And babies between 4 and 6 months, this starts to lessen. And it's basically where if you put your finger on the bottom of their lip, they'll have a reflex reaction, which is where their tongue comes straight out. Now, as they move closer towards 6 months, this starts to lessen. And what that means is that rather than when you put food on their tongue, them going and just spitting it straight back out, they'll actually start to be able to go, oh, hold on, what's this? And use their tongue to move food to the back of their mouth.
Okay.
So it's a really tricky one, that, because it's really hard to test. I mean, I tested it with both of mine, and it is like a case of, are you doing that as a reflex, or are you doing it because my finger's on your mouth? But it's a really good way. And but those three all together, over a kind of period of time, if you're seeing those three signs and they're around 6 months, pretty good indication that your little one is ready for food.
Okay, fine. And then the question that I guess is on everyone's mind is like, what is the best quote unquote food to start weaning your baby with?
Okay, my opinion or everyone's? So
let's go with your opinion.
Okay. So there's a lot of research largely done in the UK, which is around introducing veggies as the first food to baby.
Okay.
And actually, although the NHS don't officially say, yes, just start with veggies, they do say to focus on kind of bitter, savoury and veggie tastes, not just sweet.
Gotcha.
So the reason for that is because babies are actually all born with a preference for sweet foods. It's why they love, they accept breast milk and they accept formula milk, and it makes sense. But obviously in our society, a lot of sweet foods aren't necessarily nutritionally beneficial. So, and also babies don't need help to accept those sweet foods. Give them an apple puree and they're going to go, yes, please, I'll have that again, because it is super sweet. But what they do need help to accept is veggies. And weaning is all about experiencing, experimenting, learning, teaching babies to eat, but also teaching them to accept a variety. So I'm a massive fan of starting with veggies because it starts off with a totally new taste they're not used to. We know that building familiarity with a variety of flavours, including savoury and bitter, can help with acceptance of those flavours later on. And veggies are notoriously hard to get, toddlers to actually accept and babies to accept. And again, for you, if you imagine if you were given an apple puree as your first ever food, and then 3 days later someone went, actually, now try broccoli, you're going to be like, no, give me back that sweet stuff. So it's really about building up some familiarity with savoury, bitter, umami flavours. And if you think about all the variety in veggies that you can get of flavours, starting off with that just for the first 7-10 days of weaning can really help their palate to start to accept those flavours. So when you do start to go in there with a variety of other tastes, whether that be, you might start with then eventually offering things like porridge oats or chicken or, it might be fruits as well. Your baby has already had a nice taste of variety.
Gotcha.
And I think it's the variety that's really key, but I'm a massive fan of starting off with veggies. Generally, and for years, the consensus has been start off with fruit and veg. But like I say, I like to go in there first with the veggies and then build a variety, because iron is important and we need to be getting that into baby's diet too after those first few days, so or first 10 or so days of weaning. But that's how I like to recommend it.
When I think about bitter foods, right, I'm thinking about those brassica vegetables.
Yeah.
So would you say if someone was to choose certain vegetables, go for the most bitter first? So like radicchio or
I wouldn't, not necessarily. I'd say absolutely include that, but I'd say variety is your friend, honestly. And this is the case throughout whole of weaning. Variety. If you can get your baby used to a variety early on, they're so much more likely to accept a variety later. So the same with veggies, like if it might be broccoli, it might be kale, it might be spinach, it might be potato, it might be some avocado for something that's a bit more neutral. It doesn't just have to be bitter flavors. And actually for a baby it might be quite a lot to have like 5 days of really bitter flavors, and you might end up with them going, no more, I can't take any more. So variety is great, and especially if on day one they had something they didn't really, or we say didn't like, but it wasn't really, didn't kind of take to them, then the next day if we're trying something different, great, because they're going to be like, oh, this is new texture. Like potatoes are a really great one because you can start to build on what you add to potato as well. Avocado is a great one because it's literally mash it, it's full of healthy fats, really great for baby brain as well, and it's a funny texture. So all of these things, it's about, I always like to talk about weaning as a journey. It's like explorative, so if you can think of it as exploring and journey, you're getting this wrong or right.
Yeah.
You know, one day they're going to go, no way, not eating that. And the next day they'll go, all right, I'll try this, you know, that is fine and normal too.
Okay.
So variety is your friend for sure.
Okay. I've got 3 questions on the back of that might be a little bit difficult to answer.
Okay.
So if someone has introduced bitter foods into their child's diet early on, does that dictate their preferences a lot later on in life at all? Do we have any
So there is research, yes, not necessarily just around bitter, but there is research that offering a variety of tastes earlier and starting off with some more of those savoury tastes can impact acceptance of those later. Yes, there is research. And
even
then
into adulthood?
So the research suggests that actually introducing those increases acceptance in young children, and young children's acceptance increases acceptance in adulthood. You know, it's one of those sort of jumps to the research, but it is there is a lot of research done in the UK. There's a lady called Marion Hetherington, and she's done a lot of research on this around introducing veggies and taste and flavour profiles and acceptance later on, and it's fascinating. It's not really something that's talked about elsewhere, but like I said, even in the NHS, if you look at their weaning website, they will recommend, you know, starting with vegetables or fruits, and then they actually state, you know, make sure you get in those savoury veggies as well. So it is there is a lot of research that suggests it's a good idea. However, I always like to add a caveat: it's not the be all and end all. If you didn't do it, it doesn't mean your baby's going to be fussy. If you didn't do it, it doesn't mean your baby's never going to accept those foods. Absolutely not. As you know, in the, you know, medical and health, there's so many variables, and this is just one, but it definitely can be helpful.
Okay. Why is there general opposition of kids? And maybe I'm making an assumption here, but why is there general opposition of kids to bitter foods in the first place? Is there some evolutionary basis behind this?
Well, we think so. There is actually some amazing research that you'd never get signed off today that was done. I can't even remember the date of the papers now, but where they basically injected fluid into a baby's amniotic fluid.
Oh gosh!
They injected sweet flavour. And actually what this resulted in was babies increasing their swallowing rate. Oh, wow. They then did the same with bitter. And guess what? Babies reduced their swallowing rate. So we know that it's an innate preference, the preference for sweet or bitter. But the thing is that, you know, what we believe this is an evolutionary thing that makes, you know, in nature, bitter things may be more likely to be poisonous. Sure. So we think it's an evolutionary thing where babies are less likely to want to accept that straight away until they've been given experience and had somebody almost give them that acknowledgement that this is safe. So that's why perhaps the familiarity thing helps. Like once you've built some familiarity to that, you accept it. You know it's safe, for example. So that's why we think it is. It's really fascinating. And also sweet foods in nature tend to come along with lots of calories and lots of nutrients. So again, it makes sense for them to really want to accept a strawberry, you know, or raspberry or something like that, which is sweeter, because actually it does tend to come with fluids, nutrients, and some calories in there as well. But obviously in today's society, we have a lot of sweet foods around us that are unnaturally sweet and don't necessarily come along with all the benefits. So that's why we're saying we really want to help kids to actually enjoy these other flavors too. So that's where it comes from.
I agree. I think in the context of a food environment that is very sweet and ultra processed, trying to get the appreciation for bitter foods early on is something that we should pragmatically be thinking about doing. And I guess the third question is, if I am a parent listening to this and you know what, I've given them all those sweet foods first because that's what they wanted, and I gave them, you know, the apple puree pouches and stuff, and they don't like any vegetables whatsoever, is it possible, and is there a way to try and coax them to get more diversity into their diet?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. So if you've done that, you're not alone, because I'd say that a massive proportion of parents will have done that. A lot of the, you know, the foods on offer are, and I'm not saying there is anything wrong with giving apple or pear. There really, really isn't. It is the variety, the message that comes back to. So please don't worry. You haven't done anything wrong. You haven't done anything that the majority of people have done. But definitely you can make changes. Now, like I said, there's a few things. Familiarity is really, really key. Kids like what they're used to. It's the same with routines and people. They like what they are familiar with. So this is about the challenge of how can we build familiarity with these foods. And it doesn't even have to be in eating it. It might be in seeing it. playing with it, shopping for it, cooking with it, watching you eat it, just literally having it on the table, even if they're not eating it. All of that is building familiarity. So if you are doing that, you're already working towards getting them to eat it. The second thing, don't pressurize them to eat it.
Okay.
Research shows time and time again, the more pressure we put on babies to eat food, the less willing they are to do so. And although as parents, the innate thing, our thing is like, we need to get you to eat. We know that if you eat, you survive. We know if you eat good food, you're healthy. So for us as parents, it's so within us to go, we have to do this. But actually, we know that pressure to eat up does not work. It has the opposite effect. And I mean, if you talk to adults, people our generation and older, they'll probably say that at school they've got horror stories from being forced to eat food, and it put them off that food for life. So if you think about it from that context, like if you were ever forced to eat a food and now you do not like that food, just try and put yourself into a baby's perspective. They're not going to want to have that food if they're forced. And the same with toddlers. The more you put the pressure on, the more they're like, no. So nonchalance. Okay. That's another tip. Nonchalance. Like and I promise you, nonchalance at mealtime makes such a difference. Just, I always say to parents with the fussy stage kids, using the phrase, that's okay, you don't have to eat it, can have such a big impact. Okay. I'm not saying overnight.
Sure.
And there's obviously other factors at play, but that statement alone can have a massive impact on meal times.
That's a good one. I'm keeping that one. I'm putting that one in my back pocket. Do you think this is a bit of a Western phenomenon? I mean, I haven't obviously looked at the research looking at other countries. Like, I'm thinking of traditional diets, Indian culture, Asian culture. Do they experience fussy eating to the same degree that we do? Or is this something that is unique to the UK, US?
It's a really good question, because actually up until a few weeks ago when I did a really great course on fussy eating, I would have said probably not, no. But actually I did a really interesting course that said that actually fussy eating and food refusal is quite a kind of global problem. I think the research is really mixed. And the reason for that is because the term fussy eating is so hard to define. And what fussy is to you might be completely different to what it is to me or somebody listening here today. So it's very hard to conduct research. There's no official definition for fussy eating. Okay. And like I say, for one parent, it might be that their child didn't eat broccoli for a week. And for another family, it might be their child ate 3 foods for a week, So fussy eating is really, really subjective, and it's so hard to study. So I don't know the definite answer around that. I would say that it probably is more common in like Western societies, but I think it's really hard to take the variables. So for example, like you mentioned India, in India there's a lot more weaning with kind of strong flavors and herbs and spices and dals and lentils. Like that's the norm. So actually maybe you won't see so much fussy eating, because actually they've been kind of subject to lots of variety, and that's generalizing massively, but it's very, very hard to figure that out. So I don't know the answer to that, but yeah.
In terms of herbs and spices, actually, if they're ground and they're added to food, obviously without salt, because that's something that we don't recommend for babies, can that be part of the weaning process as well?
Yes, please. Yeah. I love it. Yes, definitely. So I would go in there slowly with the herbs and spices, just because it's really good to get them used to them. But again, it's that stealth.
Sure.
So gradually, little bit here and there. You don't want to put baby off of a food, like, with having it too much. So, but yeah, definitely. Once you started to introduce those foods, get those flavors in. It's all more variety. It's all more nutrition. It's more flavor. It's more experience for them. And, like I said, the more you get in early, the more they're going to accept those flavors. So if your little one's grown up and things like cumin and cinnamon and nutmeg are totally normal in their diet, that's going to be stuff that they will accept when you're offering meals to them later on, because it becomes the norm.
Gotcha.
And I'm not saying they won't go through phases where they refuse a lot of those foods. Absolutely, that's going to happen for most of us. But yeah, get those in early. It's brilliant. So, and I love that, like cooking with flavor. If you cook with those foods, make them for your baby, because the more you can get them having your family meals early on, the better. The easier life will be, the more that they will accept. I always love to say this thing, if your baby's only been exposed to, let's say, 20 foods by the time they're 1, when they then go through that fussy phase, they're going to reject, let's say, 5-10 foods. So they're going to end up with quite a limited diet. If your baby's been exposed to like 100 foods by the time they're 1, then they're going to maybe go through a fussy phase where they start to reject maybe like 10, 20 foods, but they're still going to have a really varied diet. So the variety is, get it in there. And those herbs and spices are great too.
Okay, this is great because I have like an anxious parent sort of person on my shoulder that's speaking to me. It's basically me. So you mentioned two things there. When the toddlers go through their fussy or their child goes through the fussy phase, and the number of foods that they should be exposed to by age 1. Do we have any sort of general numbers on those two?
So the second that you said there about the foods before 1, there is a whole, I think it's like an American thing where people recommend doing 100 foods before 1.
Yeah.
But I'm not really an advocate for that because I feel like it puts more pressure on parents. And also this idea of like 100 foods when you're like, oh my God, my baby will only eat 3 foods is quite a lot to have to do. So for me, like I say, I wouldn't put a number on it. I'd say variety, and like, how you cook, try and cook in the way that you like to cook at home and get your baby used to the foods that you have, the ingredients that you use, because that's going to have the best knock-on effect to getting them to be accepting your meals. So, use that. Yeah, sure, try more variety, maybe spice up your own foods a little bit more, but do use what's norm for you and your family. What was the first question?
The first one was when they go through a sort of fussy, like no.
Not having that. So again, hugely variable. The research suggests that it kind of peaks between 18 months and 3 years of age. That's when we tend to see it peaking. But there's a few reasons for that. So for example, first of all, babies tend to grow very fast in the first year of life, and that growth rate starts to decline after 1 year of age. And with that, sometimes we see appetites dropping. This was absolutely classic, happened with my son. At 18 months, I was like, wow, he's massively reduced his portion sizes. Really normal. The second thing is something called neophobia, which is basically a fear of new food or a fear of unfamiliar foods, often kicks in. And this is when they start to become more independent, when they start to move around a little bit more. So it makes sense for them to be a little bit more wary about what they're eating. It doesn't mean there's nothing we can do. It means that we maybe need to help them realize, this food is safe, this food is okay, by role modeling, by showing them, by offering it, by building familiarity, all those things I've already said. And the third thing is as they're seeking independence. You'll find at those toddler ages, they want to put their own clothes on. They don't want their hair how you've done it. They don't want, to brush their teeth. It's so fun. You can't wait till you get there. But they start to become little independent things. And do you know what they can sometimes control? What they put in their mouth. So you do start to see roughly around this age. It can happen earlier, it can happen later. It's really normal. Loads that you can do to kind of reduce it. But the one thing I would say to all parents is if it happens, please don't worry. It's so normal. And it is to be expected. And if you can expect it coming, then hopefully that just automatically takes some of the pressure off.
And is there any sort of evolutionary explanation as to why they might experience, this sudden urge to become independent as a little 18-month or 36-month-old? Like it seems like nonsensical for evolution to have sort of encouraged kids of that age to become, walk out of camp
their independence.
And go hunting on their own, that sort of thing.
Well, the neophobia thing makes sense because they are being more independent in terms of they're moving around on their own. So it's often when they start to crawl and walk. And that means there is more independence. And obviously, evolutionary, we probably grew up more in communities. So rather than it being two caregivers who were like in charge of this one child, it would have been a community. So everybody would have been looking after your kids. So I guess from that point of view, it probably makes sense for them to be a little bit more wary and be a little bit more independent. And in terms of neophobia, that's what we think it is. Like when they move around, when they become independent, they're going to start to go, I'm not sure about that. Let me just wait to see somebody else eat it first, kind of thing. So that's why that, and the independence thing, I guess, is similar. Like I say, it's that community, that goodness knows, but it's exhausting.
I can imagine. I mean, I guess like if I'm just like hypothesizing, maybe you need that sort of like brain switch to try and encourage you to start walking for the first time. Like, you're independent, mate. You can start like getting off on your own 2 feet and walking around. So maybe there's like the sort of pop reason for why that's happening. With
animals, sometimes animals give birth and it's like day one,
100%
walking, and you're like, what have we done so wrong?
I mean,
why does it take us 18 months?
It's so odd, isn't it, that
Yeah.
we have to, like, you know, unless a child is being taken care of 24/7,
Yeah.
they wouldn't survive
No.
in the world. And so, yeah, it's a real sort of unique scenario
It
that
really
I
is.
can't see, you know, matched anywhere else in nature,
Yeah.
where we have to look after them for so long.
I
But,
find it
yeah.
baffling, honestly, when you see like birthing videos of animals and you're like,
Yeah.
that giraffe.
Totally.
Yeah, amazing.
Okay, so we had loads of questions from so many parents, and maybe I should start off with that in terms of the anxiety around parenting. I mean, me and my wife, we went to baby classes, and the WhatsApp group is just like off with loads of questions about obviously the pregnancy experience and the birthing experience, and then afterwards, and you're left with this baby and you're like, what do I do? So I can understand the anxiety for that, but it kind of seems never ending. And there is, especially what we were talking about before we started recording, a lot of anxiety, but a lot of judgment from a lot of parents.
Definitely.
And I'm sure, you know, this is something you have to deal with fairly often.
Yeah, I think it's so hard. I think from my experience, parenting is really hard. I think that, you know, you're constantly questioning yourself and, you know, not sure if you're doing things right. And I think, you know, especially as women, you know, I do feel like quite often we're raised to self-doubt and to question ourselves a little bit, and to maybe not quite have the confidence in our own convictions. So I think that is part of it. We often like raising kids, but there's no manual. You know, nobody actually knows exactly how to do it. And also, you know, research changes. So like how we, you know, parent kids now, you know, gentle parenting, and it's so different to probably how we were raised and the generation before us was raised. So it's ever evolving, it's ever changing. You're always self-doubting. You never know. And also, I guess it's like the most precious thing in your whole entire life. So you kind of want to do it right. And I feel like with parenting, there actually isn't really a right way. Also throw into the mix that all kids are completely different. You know, all kids are completely different. They have their own personality. So when you've got your guideline of this is how you should wean, or this is how you should parent, and then you've got a child who just does not conform to that, you're going, well, I'm trying to do it all right, but I'm still failing. And we tend to internalize and blame ourselves. And I think that the judgment around parenting often comes from that feeling of like, maybe I feel like I'm not getting it right, so I'm going to maybe judge others for how they're doing it. And it might even be passed down, you know, if my mum felt like you shouldn't, you know, feed a child in a certain way or talk to a child in a certain way, then that's going to be how I believe. So when I see others doing it, I'm going to maybe frown against that. So I guess it's like a kind of pack culture slightly as well. Oh, it's so hard. I mean, I could be here all day talking this alone, because I feel like parenting is really challenging, and I feel like we punish ourselves, and I feel like the judgment, and also you open yourself up to like online. And I think the online community has made it harder because rather than it being a smaller community who's your best friends, your family, you know, your grandparents, you're opening yourself up to the judgment of people who do not live in the same way as you. So that kind of judgment is rife. And I mean, online can be really brutal anyway. So I think with parenting, it's even worse.
It always seems like there's never the right way. And that's, I mean, it's true. There isn't a right way. There is the way that you're doing with your own individual, with your own parent, with your own child, and, you know, if you have a partner or not. So it's... The ideas that are banded around online are just like so polar opposite sometimes to the way I think as well. And I think it's about blocking out the noise. And whilst online communities can be useful for, I mean, we've Googled a lot of things, we've read a lot of forums, they can be really, really useful. But then I think you need to know where the line is to be drawn.
Completely.
And sometimes that can be very difficult. I mean, like my wife is very, she's very diligent, and sometimes I think that is to our detriment, because if you're reading milestones and you are a diligent individual, if you're not hitting those milestones, it's kind of like a worry sets in and panic, and then you start, you know, Googling all different sorts of things.
What's wrong?
Exactly. So I can see where it kind of spirals.
Definitely.
So that's why I think it's really nice for someone in your position to not only share your personal experience with kids, but also just relax a lot of anxieties out there and say there are guides, there are general sort of, you know, areas, but like there is a lot of differences as well.
And I so believe that. I think even on my book, you know, I've got a 30-day plan in my book that some parents love, because they're like, you've taken the thought out of it. Day 1, day 2, day 3, I know what to do. And that's great. But you know what? If that isn't for you, that's okay too. You don't have to follow this. You don't have to follow government guidelines. You know, you can absolutely pick the bits that work for you and your family, because nobody knows your context. So I think that is so important. And I'm a massive believer in like you parenting the way that you want to parent. Obviously, there are things you need to do to try and keep them safe, and you can do certain things to keep them healthy. But, you know, you have to pick your battles as well, don't you? So there's so many things kind of flying at you as a parent. And I just feel like you've got to do, you know, the survival. What can you do to survive and try and raise this children healthy without driving yourself mad, basically? And definitely blocking out the judgment of others, because like I say, they don't understand your context quite often. And I think online is so hard for that as a parent, and I've really struggled with it over the years, and I've worked with other people who have really found it quite hard, the judgment. But like I say, they don't know you or your child, so they can't possibly comment.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And from one sort of controversial area to another, we have mentioned it, and I want to come back to it, and it's pouches.
Pouches, yeah.
So pouches, probably the number one thing that we were asked about in terms of whether they should have pouches. Are they good for us? Are they ultra processed? Are they things that we, you know, can rely on? What is your 2 cents on
how long
pouches?
have you got?
I think we should. We can spend as long as you like about pouches, because I'm not there yet. But you know, I'm going to be there soon.
So I think, just with all the rest of, you know, the advice that I like to give, I think there's like an ideal and there's a reality. And you know, there is somewhere kind of in the middle of that, maybe, that is where we need to focus. So pouches are there. They're not going anywhere. They can be very helpful and useful and convenient for families, without a shadow of a doubt. You know, like I say, you know, we're living in quite a tough world where there's a lot of expectation, especially on, you know, parents and working mothers to kind of do and be it all. And I think pouches can be a really great, helpful, convenient solution. However, it's really important not to overly rely on them. And I've seen this time and time again. There are a number of reasons why pouches aren't brilliant. For example, quite often the textures of them, they have to fit a certain texture in order for them to come out the spout. So you're always going to be limited in what the texture your child can get from a pouch. They also are often unnecessarily sweet, because they are often add sweetness, because then babies are more likely to accept it, as we've already heard. So they're more likely to be consumed, so they're more likely to be bought again. So they often are overly sweet. They also don't taste like your home cooked food. And if you want your child to eat your home cooked food, as we've talked about this whole time, familiarity. And if they get familiar with pouches, and then you go, oh, well, here's my home cooked meal, which has got cumin and lentils, they're going to be like, no way. That's very hard to get them to then accept it. And also, food is so much more than like what could be kind of sucked out of a pouch. And I think the way that we feed the pouches is something that I do have a bit of an issue with. Food is, like I've already talked about, you know, seeing it, watching others eat it. If a baby is kind of sucking on a pouch, they're not seeing food, they're not smelling food, they're not visually experiencing any of that meal. It's going straight to the back of the throat and being really easily swallowed. There's not even any eating skill involved in it. So actually, eating is about learning. It's about learning how to eat. It's about learning to accept variety. And it's, like I said, about that familiarization with food. And actually, pouches don't allow you to do that. So for all of those reasons, I'm not the biggest fan. But like I say, I am also a realist, and I know how hard it is for parents. And I think, yes, use them. Use them when you need them. Use them when you'll have the busiest day and I cannot get home and spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes cooking a meal for my baby. So do use them. Tap into them. Like if you go on holiday and you're worried about what's going to be there, take some pouches with you. But try and find more savory ones. Try and find ones and have a look at the back of the pack. And if it says on the front, spaghetti bolognese, you wouldn't expect there to be apple in it. So have a little ruthless look at the pouches and choose ones that are more savory. Try and choose ones that are for slightly older kids, especially if your little one is used to textures, because they're going to have a bit more texture to them. Also, you can use them in other ways, like use them, spread them on toast, you know, have finger foods to dip in them so that you're still helping your baby to learn to eat. And the other thing is decant into a bowl and offer them with a spoon so that your baby isn't sucking them through the pouch. And like I say, say try not to make it your every single day, because that's when you are likely to get your little one not accepting your family meals. And weaning is about moving your baby onto your family meals, and your family meals are not pouches. So I really don't want to shame. I don't want any parents who use pouches to feel bad, because one of the things I think is that parents really, they see other people using them. They see them available at the supermarket and they're like, this must be what is best for my baby, because it's almost, that's what is kind of suggested. But it isn't, there's a lot more you can do, but please do not feel shamed for it, because it's fine. They are fine to use. They are all baby grade. They use good ingredients to make sure that they're, the kind of best for your baby. But I would say that, it is definitely better not to overly rely on them for so many reasons. That's my take on it. But please, please, please do not feel bad if you're using them. They are fine.
I think that's a really, really good in-depth explanation. And I kind of see, I definitely see your point about habituating food coming from a packet, because these babies are like sponges. And if they normalize food coming from a plastic, sweet, and like brightly colored packet, then it could habituate them towards those kind of foods, which tend to be ultra processed in the future. So
can I just add there, it's the same with, I posted recently about babies not needing snacks, and some people
talk about that.
livid about babies under one not needing snacks. And I did have a lot of people saying, my baby loves her baby crisps and you are never stopping me giving them. But babies at 1, they don't need crisps. And even if they are baby crisps, exactly what you say, what we're doing is we are showing very young children that this is food. So we are literally habituating those eating patterns of having your hand in a bag of crisps and kind of crunching on that food that is actually doesn't really have any nutrients in it, and it takes you not very long to kind of eat a really large amount of calories, and there's not really a lot of energy and nutrients alongside that. And that is just habituating like crisps, making it the norm. I've talked so much about familiarity. If your baby's 7 months old and what they're familiar with is eating from a packet and these kind of crisps that just melt in your mouth and that don't really take much biting and chewing, they're going to want crisps when they're older, you know? And we know that eating loads of those kind of foods isn't going to be good for long-term health. So again, I really hate, I don't want to be like the shamer, and these are fine every now and then and in context, pop them on a plate with some other finger foods, fine. But all the constantly having these kind of baby crisps that are created as if they're like great food for your baby. I'm not the big fan. Sorry, I had to add that.
No. It's super important, because I think we want to be responsibly informing people. I think that the wrong thing to do would be to fear creating anxiety or judgment and not addressing what is potentially a real big issue further down the line for these kids. And I think exactly the way you've done it, in like a really sort of pragmatic explanation as to why they're bad. But if you feel like you have to rely on them in certain circumstances, don't feel bad.
Absolutely.
It's just part of the modern environment that we live in. And I love the sort of the tips that you gave around some of these pouches and products, because they're definitely, I think, touted as healthy. And the way I look at them I haven't bought any yet, but the way I look at them in the supermarkets, they look like something from the health food aisle because of the colouring and all that kind of stuff. And it's like one ingredient, whatever. But there are a few tips that you suggested to look out for if you are going to choose some pouches to have when you're in a pinch. When you're in a pinch.
You
can have that one.
Brilliant.
In a pinch, you can have a pouch. What are the ingredients that you would say, maybe less of those and more of those, and then perhaps these crisps as well. Some of them are like vegetable crisps. Are they just as bad as the potato crisps? Are they? Maybe we could talk about that.
Oh God. Okay, so can of worms. So first of all, with the baby pouches, I think it's just really being a bit savvy about looking at the ingredients. And like I say, variety is key. And there are some companies that do a really good job at like trying to get variety in there. You might have some with quinoa and with those herbs and spices that we talked about. And also ingredients that you would expect. So for example, I've already used the example, but if you had spaghetti bolognese and you turn it over, are those ingredients you would expect to be in the spaghetti bolognese? So I definitely say be a bit ruthless with the package. Don't take it at face value. Turn it over. Have a look on the back. Are they things that you would put in a spaghetti bolognese? Just standard. Are they experimenting a little bit more with what they're putting in? So it's not just your apples and your pears and your spag bowl. Are there packages which have got herbs and spices and, because that's great, and you're adding diversity to your child's diet and other flavors as well. And that can be a great complement to the meal, the variety that your child's having at your house. It's something new, it's something varied. So definitely look at those. And then, like I say, think about the textures. And if you can, think about the textures, that if your little one has moved through, smooth purees and onto other things, and then you're kind of offering them like an apple pouch or a puree that's really smooth, then they're not really moving forward with their textures, which we want. But again, if it's every now and then, it's never really going to be a problem.
Okay.
And with the baby crisps, yes, there are some that are like based on vegetables, and to parents, and the same with fruits. There's loads of like chewy fruit things that's like 100% fruit. But it's not so much about the kind of the ingredients. It's more about, like I said, that kind of habit of what we're teaching is that these snacks and these chewy things, not necessarily great for teeth, not very many nutrients. Also snacks, in my opinion, should be mini meals. So when children are 1+, snacks are fine. They can really help complement a toddler's diet who's growing and who needs a bit extra. But those snacks should be mini meals. They should be balanced. We want to be looking at the different food groups and trying to include those in snacks, because every kind of, children have really small tummies. And if we fill them up on things that don't contain much in the way of nutrients, that aren't balanced, it means that they might not be getting all of the variety, the nutrients that they need every day. So when we are offering snacks, we do want them to be tapping into energy, nutrients, fiber, giving them all those things that we know they need to have. So that is my problem with the snacks, is that they aren't balanced. They often, you give a baby packet, it might say like, this contains 5 portions. But, a lot of babies will eat the entire thing and not much in the way of fiber, or but I like in one of my books, I think it's my second book, my toddler book, I've said in there about snacks. I did a whole lot on snacks, and I've said, if you're going to offer the baby crisps, it's fine, but pair it with some red pepper fingers, which have vitamin C and fiber and water for hydration, and pair it with some sticks of toast so that you've got some, again, more fiber, carbohydrates, whole grains. So it's about the context in which they're given, and also the amount and the variety. And if we're relying on them every single day as a snack for a baby or toddler, it isn't going to be ideal. I feel like I'm really, really talking negatively and making parents more anxious, good. But I do feel like they're not ideal as everyday kind of food items for babies and toddlers.
Well, this is the beauty of long form podcasting, which is what I was talking about before we start recording, because we can actually have a nuanced conversation. So rather than it being a soundbite or like a short caption where you can't reference, or you can't sort of like further explain the context in which you're saying these aren't great for you, the translation gets lost, and then that's where you get the worry. So hopefully people will listen to the entire podcast instead of just the clip, and they will have a much better appreciation for your opinion, but also what the research says as well. Because, I think the same can be said of adult nutrition. You can have like vegetable crisps. Yes, they're one ingredient and they just have a bit of oil, maybe some salt on. But because you've disrupted that food matrix so much, you're going to be quicker absorbing those nutrients as well. And the ways to mitigate that, very similar to adult nutrition, is to pair it with more complex foods. So you slow the digestion, you get more nutrients, you get more fiber, which has benefits all round. So absolutely.
Exactly that. And that's the thing, I think I always like talking about these things, but like I say, the reality is many parents will give those, and many parents will rely on some pouches. So how can we just make that slightly easier?
Totally.
How can we make the choice a little bit better? It's not about saying don't do it, because that's not reality. They're not going away. But how can we do it but just make it a little bit better? So definitely.
It's like me saying you shouldn't have meal deals ever. And like, look, I have to have something when I'm on the road, or I'm in a train, and so it's about giving strategies to people when they're out and about, and actually options when this is what they have to rely on.
Exactly that.
And like, not everyone can. I mean, like, I'm coming from someone who has a dog. I've got a Cavapoo who's 4 years old, and unfortunately she's got IBD, so we have to cook her food from scratch every 2 weeks. And I literally cook a vat of cod and brown rice. We had it done by a doggy nutritionist. They exist.
Love that.
I didn't even know that.
Love that.
There's literally a handful of doggy nutritionists about in the UK. Very niche. But yeah, it's been like her menu has been made, and we have to cook it every 2 weeks, and then we puree it, and then we batch it, and then we literally open one every single day. And I probably end up going to be pureeing a lot of my kids' foods anyway, because it's something I've got used to. I won't mix them up. No. Although her diet is pretty much
I bet, it's balanced. Oh my God, that's good. I love the dedication to your dog. That's so cute.
Yeah. Well, she literally can't eat anything else, the poor thing, because IBD in dogs is a single protein allergy. So anyway, so I'm used to pureeing. So I'm probably going to be the exception to the rule, but if I am going to be relying on pouches every now and then, these are sort of the strategies I'm going to have. And I think it's really important to give folks that choice as well. Gosh, I've just got loads of controversial questions here.
Oh God, there's been a lot of controversy.
Is it healthy to raise a child vegan?
Love the question.
Okay.
Love the question. Absolutely, you can raise babies vegan. You know, just like, we talk about plant-based nutrition and flexitarianism and veganism and vegetarianism. All of those can be fine. But again, it's context. You could have a meat-eater diet for a baby that is really not very good for them. And you could have a vegan diet for a baby that is really not very good for them, isn't going to give them everything that they need. But yeah, of course, you can have a vegan diet that does provide everything. The caveat to that is that if your baby is on a vegan diet, you most likely will need a supplement.
Okay.
So you possibly will need a supplement or fortified foods, which are a bit harder for young babies because they're largely going to be more processed and have salt added to them. So you might need to get a multivitamin, which would include something like maybe some calcium, possibly B12, iodine, and possibly iron. But I would say if you are raising a baby vegan, it's definitely worthwhile having a chat with a healthcare professional if that's within your kind of abilities, just to make sure that you're kind of getting it right. You can easily balance out a vegan diet for a baby. Lentils, beans, pulses, chickpeas, nut butters, all really great sources of iron. Tofu, really great food. I mean, it's something in my latest book, I've used a lot of tofu, and my family love it now. It took a while, but we're now massive fans, and it's such a nutritious and nutrient-rich food. So loads of foods you can include, but B12 is very hard to get. You can't really get it on a entirely plant-based diet. So definitely that. And iodine often comes in dairy food or in, you can get it in seaweed, but seaweed's quite variable in terms of the amount of iodine that it has in it. So it's not really a great food for babies. So the best thing is to try and maybe get that from a supplement. Or if they're having like fortified milks, most milks now, thankfully, do add iodine. So fortified milk is a good one. But yeah, and you might want to check calcium and iron. And I would say just for your own, also vitamin D, that's another one as well. So those are some of the nutrients you might want to look at. And just other than that, balanced diet with a bit of fortification / supplementation, and they're absolutely fine to do. Yeah.
Gotcha. Onto supplements, actually. Yeah. So let's say I have a omnivore diet and I'm giving that to my child, but they're fussy and they don't like their food, and I'm doing all the things, I'm adding diversity, but I'm worried that they are under consuming. They might not be losing weight, but they're under consuming. Should I therefore supplement with a multivitamin to make sure that I'm checking off calcium and B12 other than the vitamins that are generally recommended as Healthy Start vitamins? Yeah,
so Healthy Start, the government recommend vitamin D as standard. So from a breastfed baby from birth should be having vitamin D. And from when a baby has less than 500 mils of formula milk, they should be having vitamin D. The government in the UK also recommend A and C. So that's from 6 months, or from when a baby is having less than 500 mils of formula, they should be having those three. Now, the A and the C are a little bit kind of, if your child does eat quite a good varied diet, they're likely to be getting enough. There's certain pockets of the UK that don't get enough A and C. So that's why that recommendation is there. So A, C and D recommended. When it comes to a multivitamin, controversial again, I personally think children's appetites are really up and down. They are very resilient, so they will, they're quite good at absorbing what they need. And it is quite rare for fussy children to not grow properly and not get enough nutrition.
Okay.
It is quite rare. And if that is the case, I would definitely be saying you need to go and see a specialist if you are worried, tired, lethargic, not, producing enough dirty nappies, not got enough energy, not growing properly. I would definitely say those are flags to go and see somebody about it. But generally, if you're little one is kind of up and down with food, they should be okay. But I would say if you've got things like maybe multiple allergies, or they are very fussy and it's been going on for a long time, or they are vegetarian and vegan, or they're restricted in their diet in some other ways, a multivitamin can be helpful.
Okay.
The only trouble is there's not really that many great ones available.
Oh, really?
So and they bamboozle parents. There's so many. You go down the aisle and you're like, wow, which one of these for which age? And a lot of them are gummies, and a lot of them are pills that actually babies and toddlers can't swallow.
Oh, wow.
So it's really hard.
Gosh.
But, there are some out there that are a bit better. But I would say, like, the majority of people, A, C, and D, you're absolutely fine to stick with that. Okay. If you are worried on any other level, then a multivitamin can be a really helpful safeguard. But choose wisely, which is really hard because it's hard to choose wisely.
I mean, it's really hard for adults, we're bombarded with supplements and stuff. And I see some, when I was seeing patients regularly, I remember them bringing different supplements, and I was like, these, I mean, I've got no idea what the interactions are, first off, but I have no idea what the quality of these are either.
Exactly that.
You're spending a lot of money on supplements to fix a problem that actually can probably be addressed with food and lifestyle and other things.
Exactly.
So definitely buyer beware, but I can definitely see, I mean, the vitamin industry for kids is definitely growing. I remember looking at some numbers from a Mintel report, and it's just like up and up and up. And I think it's because there is this general anxiety around the kids not getting enough because they are naturally going through fussy eating periods.
Exactly that. And also illness, that's one thing we haven't talked about, but appetite hugely is affected by illness, and babies and toddlers get ill a lot, teething, sore throats, picking up bugs, especially when they go to nursery. So you've got that reduces your appetite. They might have had a lot of diarrhea, sickness. So throw that into the mix of everything else. And it does make sense why you might want just a safeguard, but it's about trying to choose the right one. And also a lot of them have very high levels as well of nutrients that just aren't really needed. So watch this space, because we'll try and make it a bit simpler for parents.
Oh, really? Okay, great. I'm definitely gonna watch that space. I was gonna ask actually if there is an area of kids nutrition that hasn't been tackled properly. But that's a nice little Easter egg there. So we didn't talk a bit about milk at the same time as weaning. So is it meant to stay the same, or are we generally expecting it to taper off as they start introducing more solids into their diet?
Oh, so you asked about the kind of things that parents are concerned about. Milk is huge. Parents are always really worried about milk, and I think there's you can read so much different stuff online. It's so confusing, and I sometimes read things and I'm like, where has that come from? So when it comes to milk, basically at the start of weaning, baby's milk intake isn't likely to really change, because like I said, this is about exploring, learning. It's about them learning to eat, and that doesn't mean that the food is going to take over milk. But as they start to kind of build up their confidence with eating and their familiarity, and they start to eat more and move from 1 to 2 to 3 meals, which can happen, it can take a month or it can take a couple of months for them to kind of move from 1 meal to 2 meal to the next meal. But as you see that and they start to eat more at those meal times, you'll start to see hopefully a natural reduction in how much milk they have. Doesn't always work that way. Of course, some babies really love their milk. But what I would say is if, carry on responsively breastfeeding as and when, and but do try and get into a meal routine, because it can be really helpful to have a nice gap before you're offering solids. If you think about it, if baby has, a full amount of milk and then is sat down at a table and given this brand new food that, their palate isn't even likely to kind of accept that much because they've got an innate preference for the sweeter, it's going to be quite hard for them to then want to try it and have a desire to give that a go. So you do want to build up a certain level of hunger. So a routine around meal times can help with that. And like I say, responsively breastfeed within that kind of structure. You don't need to structure when baby has those breastfeeds. I know some people do like to, but you don't necessarily need to, but do structure the meals. But when it comes to formula milk, there is a very, very, very general guidance on how much. Okay. I say very, 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 because I know babies are all so different. But generally what they say is that around 7 months of age, babies should be having roughly around 600 mils in 24 hours.
Okay.
And then once baby gets to about 10 months of age, that's more likely to be about 400 mils. So you can see quite a nice kind of gradual decline in the amount of milk that baby has, because at around 10 to 12 months of age, we normally would expect that food in terms of calories starts to overtake the amount of calories that milk provides. Gotcha. Between about 10 and 12 months of age. Okay. So milk's still important. It still provides a lot of energy, nutrients, calories that baby needs to grow and develop. But as they move kind of through that weaning journey and exposure to food, their calories will start to kind of be overtaken by food by around about 12 months of age. So does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And because milk, even for us at our age, is it's still like, we read the back of the packet. He's drinking quite a bit as well, actually. We were a little bit worried about that because he's having like 800 mils plus 2 breastfeeding sessions. So he's actually drinking quite a bit. I mean, he's not like overweight or anything, but we're just, feeding him on response to like what he wants.
And that is what to do. And it is about looking for those signs. So again, when they, cry, turn their head away, suggest they don't want it, it's listening to those cues and not thinking, oh, but you need to finish this bottle.
Yes.
Because, that bottle, that expectation that they should finish the bottle is not what your baby actually needs. Yeah. So it is the cues, the signs, like we said at the beginning, the communication, listening to that. That's the most important thing. And then, babies are pretty good at being good at self-regulating if you do that. So I would say do that. But some babies do love their milk and they have a lot more than others. Yeah. But it's not necessarily a problem, but like I say, it's the cues. We call it responsively feeding, and that's with weaning and with breastfeeding or formula feeding. And it's so important to try and do that. And I think if more parents knew about that, it would make it a bit easier. Sure. Because rather than thinking, we've got to follow this, we've got to finish this bottle. Yeah. And I remember when I did work for the NHS, we used to run lots of health visiting clinics, and there were often parents who would literally be within the clinic with you being like, but she's not finishing the bottle. And you can literally see the desperation, because as parents, we're like, we need to fuel our baby. Yeah. So you can understand where it comes from, but that isn't being responsive. That's doing the opposite. So we do want parents to start to go, do you know what? It doesn't matter if the bottle's not finished. They clearly don't want it. I'll try later, when they suggest those signs of hunger. Again, maybe they're crying for food. Maybe they're kind of reaching out. Maybe when you give them the food, they're like guzzling. So you trying to look out for those signs really is important.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
So we talked about milk. We've talked about all these different purees and stuff. I should write at the top about allergens. And so this is relatively new, a sort of change in advice from or the previous thinking around when to introduce allergens like peanuts, other types of nuts, soy, egg, all that kind of stuff. I think there still is a bit of a worry of, maybe I should just wait until a little bit later to introduce those whilst they're still young and they've got an immature immune system. So what's the current thinking about when we should be introducing allergens?
So when I started my career, that was the consensus, was delay them. I can't remember the specifics, but I think majority was like delay them till a year. Whereas now we have loads of research, again, conducted in the UK. We're obviously very good at our research. We have a lot of research that suggests that early introduction of allergens is actually beneficial in reducing the risk of an allergy developing. So we do want to be getting allergens into babies' diets early. There is some research that even prior to kind of weaning age for babies who are at risk of allergies. So that means they maybe have moderate to severe eczema that's been going on for quite a long time, or they have a pre-existing allergy that they may benefit from even earlier introduction pre-6 months, but ideally alongside a healthcare professional. Okay. So you would do that, you would get the introduction in there early to test for to kind of reduce the risk of that developing later. Okay. But like I say, ideally alongside a healthcare professional. Otherwise, for the majority of children who aren't at risk of allergies, introducing it nice and early at around 6 months. So I normally say get in those kind of 7 to 10 days of veggies and then start to build in some of those allergens. Okay. There are some caveats. So you do want to introduce them in small amounts because obviously the bigger the load, the more of a reaction you will get. So small amounts, we're talking like tip of a teaspoon. You want to get them in small small amounts early on in the day. So again, in case you don't want to put your baby to bed after having an allergen, just in case there might be a reaction and you don't see it. You also want to get them in, ideally, is the only new food your baby has that day. And what this does is allows you to go, right, well, they've had all those other foods, so if there is a reaction, you can pinpoint it's the allergen. And ideally, kind of, you can, this is a bit controversial as to how you do it, but ideally offer it and then leave a couple of days before you offer a different allergen, so that you again can differentiate if there is a reaction, which it's to. So it's kind of following those 4, but if your little one isn't at risk of allergens, it is good to get them in early still. It's good to kind of get them in, and then once they've been tolerated, so for example, once you've offered egg, and most of the research has been done on egg and peanuts. So get the egg in a tiny amount, add it into something baby's already had, add it early in the day. And if your baby tolerates and accepts that, great. Start to gradually, maybe still go in with a small half a teaspoon the next time. But once you can see it's been quite well tolerated, kind of keep it in there regularly, because the regularity of adding it to the diet also is preventative. So get those in early, and try and do as many of the allergens as you can nice and early on. Keep a note if you're worried at all. Keep a little diary. In my first book, I have like note pages in each of the 10-day sections. So 10 days of adding this and then 10 days of adding that, and there's a note section, and I always think use that, because you can pop in there if any allergens you've introduced or what's happened, any reactions. But remember that it's actually very, very rare. We hear about it all the time. I think it's something like 5, don't quote me on it, but I think it's something like 5 to 7% of 2-year-olds actually develop allergies. So it's not a huge amount, even though, it does seem like it's a lot more than that. And obviously, if there is any concern, or if there does seem like there's an allergen, go and speak to someone who's a specialist, either an allergy pediatrician, allergy doctor, or a dietitian, and get, as much as you can get assessed. And because there are ways that you can try and kind of reintroduce the food, but you need to do it under guidance from a healthcare professional.
Gotcha. So just to reiterate what you said, early introduction around the same time as you're weaning other foods. Try with the veggies first, and then when you're introducing them, separate them out. So peanut and egg, and then dairy, and then try and give a gap of a few days in between, because there is a delayed reaction that can sometimes occur.
There can be.
Okay. And you mentioned a couple of times, if you are not at excessive risk or extra risk, what would constitute someone being at extra risk of allergens, other than the mild and severe eczema, because that's no longer a concern anymore, is it?
So in terms of allergy risk, it's the moderate to severe eczema for a prolonged time. That is actually like the number one risk factor of an allergy developing, and alongside a pre-existing allergy. So it's those two things. They might take family history into account. So if there is family history, you can't what's the word? You can't get somebody's allergy to peanuts, but you can have their kind of risk of having an allergy. Sorry, I'm not. So you can't
inherit
exactly.
A risk.
You can't inherit a specific allergy, but you can inherit the kind of risk of being more likely to develop an allergy. But those are the two things. So it's moderate to severe eczema, and it's which is prolonged, and it's the existing allergy. So it might be that they've already got an allergy to cow's milk protein that has been discovered. That's going to put them at increased risk of developing an allergy themselves.
We spoke to Professor Carrie Nadeau about the rise in childhood allergies globally that's affecting many young kids. This is a whole other topic here,
absolutely.
and I don't suppose that this is your exact area of research, but I'm sure this is a question you're probably asked quite a bit by parents. And when you're looking like holistically at what's going on, do you see the same trend, and how would you explain it to a parent?
Yeah, I think like you say, it isn't my field. Like anything to do with allergies, I tend to refer. But there does seem to be, and I don't know, I think one of the things that we can definitely suggest is that the variety of foods we have access to. regularly. You know, if you go in the supermarket, even go back 20 years, like, probably we have so many foods that weren't available when we were growing up. So like peanut butter, you know, it is absolute staple for many of us. But actually go back 20 years, it was probably a bit of a novelty. It was probably you could only buy it in health food stores, you know. I don't know that, I'm just saying, but I think that is definitely one of the things, that access to much more variety of ingredients that we didn't necessarily have before. But obviously that doesn't account for things like eggs and dairy. So yeah, I don't know, and I honestly think I do a lot of work with allergy specialists, you know, Dr. Helen and other people like that, Dr. Adam Fox, who I've worked with as well, who specialise in this, and I do think a lot of people are quite baffled about it, and I also think that there's a lot of self-diagnosed allergies as well. So I think there's a lot that I would definitely strongly recommend if you suspect an allergy or worried about an allergy, really try, which is easier said than done, but speak to a specialist. So like I say, a dietitian, a pediatrician who specialises in allergies, or a doctor who specialises in allergies, because it's a very niche, ever growing, ever learning about topic. You know, there's so much change in allergy in the recent years. So I think it's something that we are still learning so much about. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't think the experts necessarily know either.
I know it's a wild field, because the tools that we have at our disposal to even diagnose are so blunt, to put it lightly. And I think it's very hard to pinpoint, and a lot of it goes on clinical symptoms, previous experiences with allergy, and it's definitely on the rise. But it's it is baffling. But you're right. We should do probably a deep dive into the reasons why this might be happening with an allergy, either a dietitian expert or a professor of immunology. And I guess one of the other questions about the development of the microbiome as well, and I guess, you know, the diversity and all the things that you espouse are things that would no doubt improve a kid's microbe, which will improve their ability to, you know, withstand a whole bunch of defenses against,
exactly. And that's, you know, there's so many things that impact the microbiome, you know, so many as well. So, and especially like, you know, we know breastfeeding does, we know, you know, normal I say normal birth, but you know, non-C-section birth as well. So yeah, so many factors, and obviously diversity of diet in a young child, and also, you know, what a parent is eating during gestation, baby will also be exposed to some of that as well. So yeah, it's very complicated, and like I say, it is not my area of expertise.
Okay, probiotics. What do you think about probiotics for kids?
I think that we just don't. I mean, I don't know what you think about with adults, but I think like the research that we have with adults, we probably, you know, are still far behind it with babies and toddlers as well. I think, you know, obviously formula milk does have certain probiotics and prebiotics added to it, but I would say that we just still don't know anywhere near enough. You know, we really don't. I don't think that there's any harm, though. I actually did some work with a really, really great lady who specialises in children's gut health. She was so fantastic. So I've actually written a blog all about it and about probiotics. Oh, nice. And the consensus is kind of what you would believe. That we don't have a huge amount of research. We need to know a lot more. There are some out there that are a bit better studied and that we know might have some beneficial impact. It's likely to be hugely individual, but they are safe, so they are fine if you want to give them to your baby or toddler. And to be fair, I do give my kids probiotics, not regularly, you know, but I do give them to them. So
any particular strains that you're aware of that might have a bit more evidence?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, fine.
In the blog, the strains are in there, because I couldn't even tell you the names. You know,
we'll link to that blog for sure, because
Amazing.
that's definitely something
really
that I'm
blog.
getting asked about a lot. I mean, for adults, I think the majority of people would not benefit from a probiotic. I think you'd better spend your money on getting a diversity of food in your diet, plant focused, and getting probiotic rich foods, actually sauerkrauts, kimchi, ferments, that kind of thing. And maybe that's something that kids might benefit from as well. I always remember this blog from, I think it was the New York Times. It's called What Kids Eat Around the World. I don't know if you ever saw it. It came out a few years ago. And it was these kids with like their breakfast surrounding them. They're lying on the floor and they've done like a top-down shot. And they've got their breakfast foods around them. And it's just so different from like the Brazilian kids, the Indian kids, the Chinese kids. And it's just like so varied. And I remember the Korean child and they had like kimchi in the morning. I was like, that's something that I have.
I love it. No, really good. It's really great to do that as well. Often parents ask about giving that kind of stuff to babies and toddlers, and I'm like, you know, you might want to go in a bit gradually, but because like I say, you know, different cultures, that is the norm. I actually remember going on, I think I did like an ITV news piece about that. It was a long time ago now. It wasn't a couple of years ago. It was quite a long time, but it was beautiful, wasn't it? It was such a great article, and it was
phenomenal.
Such an eye-opener as well, you know, and I think sometimes as parents we need to go, you know, we're kind of stuck in this bubble of like, nervous about these foods, but when you look at other people and other cultures and other countries, there's such a wide variety going on, and we don't need to necessarily worry about the kind of tiny little minutiae of the things that we worry about. Because like I think I said to you at the start of this, quite often parents come to me and say, well, what do I do about breakfast if I'm just giving vegetables? And I'm like, no, you can give the vegetables, it's fine. But yeah, I think it was wonderful, that really was, because it was an eye-opener to like, just do you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love veggies for breakfast. I'm a big savoury breakfast fan. Okay, I've got some quick fire questions to go through. So what are some healthy nut-free alternatives for schools? Because obviously kids are not allowed to have nuts anymore. And even though nuts are super nutritious and all the rest of it, they have to be nut-free for reasons that we just discussed. So what are your sort of go-to nut-free?
Can I just ask? Sorry, I'm not very good at the quick fire round. Do you mean like snacks or like or
snacks? Yeah, let's go for snacks.
God, that's really hard. It actually is a real challenge because I think like nuts are such a staple in so many families, and I totally get why it's not done. But I think a lot of the things that you can make without nut butter. So it might be using like maybe a bit of coconut oil, or maybe using butter, or you can actually buy a product. I've not used it myself, called No Nuts Butter, which is kind of a nut butter but without the nuts in it as well. So like anything like that. I don't actually know. I haven't. I keep meaning to get it and try it out, but I haven't done yet. And I think just trying to go for you know, your cheeses and I mean there is kind of part of there is a call to like, you know, there's so many different allergens that kids can have, and they can be just as severe as nuts. So it is kind of a bit strange to just ban nuts and not ban like dairy or eggs, which actually can be just as severe in some families. But yeah, I totally get why, and I'm stumped.
It's tough. Okay, it's hard. I mean, I always get stuck as well whenever I'm asked about a nut-free alternative, and
hummus without the tahini.
It's like you've got to make it for yourself because most of them have tahini.
Most of them do have tahini. Or like you can do, you know, and again, it does have some added salt, but like cream cheese, yogurt as a dip is also a really good thing if you're thinking about things from that front. And also, I think I struggle with like what goes into sandwiches. But like I do actually love Marmite, and again, it's very salty, but it does contain quite a lot of nutrients, and you only need a really thin spread. So something like Marmite, like I say, hummus, but yeah, you got to make it yourself.
My wife's Australian, so we're a Vegemite household, unfortunately. I'm more Marmite, but yeah, we have to have Vegemite, unfortunately. If my kid's refusing tomatoes or a vegetable or whatever, and I want to get it into their diet, how long do I have to wait until I try and reintroduce it?
Okay, so first of all, number one, don't sweat it. Number two, keep trying with it, but without pressure. So if you take that food away, they're not going to be familiar with it. So when you try and add it again, 2 months later, it's going to be a hard no. Don't take it away, but don't force it. Eat it yourself. Those would be my tips. Okay,
great. Oily fish and mercury-containing fish, or high mercury-containing fish. What is the general advice on that? Should I be avoiding fish altogether?
Not avoid altogether, but there are some limitations on fish. I've got a really detailed blog which I deep dived the whole mercury thing. Is different in America. I know there are different rules. I know there are different concerns. But again, what it comes back to is variety, vary your fish. Don't always choose the same one. Ideally, choose oily and just have that kind of once a week.
Okay.
And kind of stick to that. But like I say, variety, small amounts, and you don't need to worry so much about it. That's what I would largely say. Remember, if they're going to nursery or school, they'll often be offered a portion of fish there as well.
Yeah.
So you don't need to necessarily offer it in a huge amount, but that's what I would say.
Okay.
Stick with oily, stick with a variety. Don't just go with the kind of same ones, and just stick to kind of one portion of oily a week, I would say.
And do you go for the smallest oily possible, or like any of them, like salmon as well as like herring or anchovy?
I think, again, variety.
Okay.
Variety is always the answer, because obviously there is like concerns over things like, the amount in salmon, the amount in tuna. So variety, if you're not always offering the same one, if it's not always tuna or always salmon, and you're trying to go for a variety, that's better.
Yeah.
But obviously, oily fish is a hard thing to get kids to eat. So try and start that in small amounts when they're young, because again, you want to build that familiarity. It is a really good food. And obviously you can tap into other things like tofu and olive oil and ground nuts and seeds for a little bit of that as well, if they're not getting it from oily fish.
Yeah, I'm going to link to that article as well. Gosh, there's so many blog articles I need to link to.
Sorry.
Plastics in kids' like plates and stuff like that. Should I be worried?
I would say probably not, but I wouldn't heat up any plastic plates. Okay. I'm always a real massive, like whenever I'm like heating food for kids, I would never heat it up with the plastics on. Okay. I don't think so necessarily. I think, again, I know I say this all the time, it's really boring, but variety. Yeah. People always ask about like what plates to use, and I think change it up so you're not always having the same one. I remember back in the day when like the silicone plates were really popular, and a lot of parents were saying it's flavoring the food. So a lot of parents kind of stopped offering a lot of silicone plates. But, again, it's variety, not giving the same. The bamboo ones are great as well. I use those loads with my kids, but you can't dishwash them. So for a lot of parents, they're like, I don't want those. But yeah, I think variety.
We got gifted a whole bunch of those. I didn't realise I can't put this in the dishwasher.
Did you? You can't put those in the dishwasher. They will ruin. That's happened multiple times. But, they only need a quick sponge wash and dry, and they're really useful. But I would say, go for those if you can.
Okay, cool. And a fun one to end off with. How do you manage not just a fussy eater, but an eater that's throwing their food around?
Yeah. So common. So food throwing didn't happen with my son because he just loved it. He just sat there. He's like, I'm not wasting any of this. My daughter, she threw food. So the way you can handle this is persistence. React the same way every time. So that's not what we do with food. Pick it up, pop it on their plate. Or if you don't want it, just pop it to the side here. Every single time react the same way. Don't draw more attention to it than that. Role model what you do with food and try not to draw more attention. The more that you say, hey, don't do that, and why do you keep throwing this on the floor? The more they're going to do it. Right. And also remember with babies, it's also part of their learning. They're going, oh, what's this? Oh, yeah, gravity. Oh, there's my food. Yeah. They're not necessarily, they're doing it as part of learning. So just try and react the same way. That's not what we do with food. If you don't want it, pop it here. Same sentence over and over. That repetition really helps. And I have a blog on it, would you believe? Which actually I ruthlessly researched, and then we tried and tested with my daughter, who was such a food thrower. Really? And she'd literally like deadpan you in the eye and be like, dropping it.
Gosh.
So, but it really worked.
How long did it take to work?
Well, I think I did a lot of trial and error, and it was only after I realised that I had to stick with that same sentence over and over that we then nailed it. And I was like, right, done now. But it took a bit of experimentation, maybe like 3 or 4 months.
Gosh, okay.
But she was,
3 or 4 months.
She'd just do anything to, get a reaction. So don't react.
This is the thing. Like, parenthood is teaching me the art of not getting angry and just being as calm as possible. Because I think it's the only thing. This is from what I'm hearing from you and from other people that I've spoken to. It's the cheat code to parenting. It's like, you have to retain resilience and absolute calm in all scenarios when they are pushing your buttons constantly.
Impossible. But yeah, exactly that.
Okay, great. Charlotte, you're awesome.
Thank you
so happy we were able to get you in and, to talk through your books. Like I said, this is a clean book, but I folded a whole bunch of the pages from the first one, and I'm really excited to get into the the next one as well. So yeah, really appreciate you
I
coming
love
in.
that. Thank you for having me on. I'm honoured, and I've absolutely loved this chat. It's been great.
If you want to learn about how to improve your gut health with simple tips, click this video right here. I've done a full video on how you can improve your gut health using food and lifestyle.